Um, Guatemala volcanoes on stamps and postcards. What you're seeing here is one of the famous, probably arguably the most famous volcano in Guatemala, and that's Fuego or fire. This volcano has erupted many times in Guatemala history. And if you stay in Antigua, which is where I saw it, it was erupting when we were there in 2004. And it's pretty spectacular. It's just a few miles from the city. So, how many? I'm sure some of you have seen erupting volcanoes in other places before, and I have too. I climbed an active volcano called Birica in Chile and looked down its throat, and that was amazing. Anyway, here are two of the most famous Guatemala stamps from the first issue of 1871. And you'll notice that they've got three volcanoes in the coat of arms, and that's Agua, Fuego, and Acatenango. And those three volcanoes are real close to one another, just outside of Antigua. And this issue was reissued. Here's Scott 391, and they modernized it, cleaned it up, and did the same thing basically. This was done in, I think, 66, and then they did a souvenir sheet after that in actually 1971. But volcanoes are a constant of Guatemala's features of their topography and geography. And here's why. Guatemala sits at the crossroads of three different plates. The Cocos Plate and the Caribbean Plate to the north are the ones that influence most of it. But also, it's the North American Plate is just above that. So all these plates interacting with each other, and the subduction zone, as you see here, when one plate's subducted beneath another, it almost always produces volcanic action, and Guatemala is no exception. This volcanic belt extends down into El Salvador, and all these volcanoes have erupted in modern times. So it's a big problem. It's a big problem for Guatemala because in addition to spreading lava and creating hazards that way, earthquakes are associated with volcanic eruptions almost always. And you also have ash that's generated by the volcanoes that lands on unstable slopes. And unfortunately for Guatemala, every few years, it seems, they have disastrous lahars or mudslides that come down and cover entire towns. There was a really bad one in 2006 that buried a whole village, and it was near where we had stayed on Lake Atitlan and killed everybody in the town. So it's a dangerous situation. For our purposes, it's interesting and dangerous, I think. Here's the volcanic belt and the name of some of the most prominent volcanoes. Pacaya is one that's right outside of Guatemala City, and it's the one that you can see from Guatemala City, and it's a very active volcano as well. There's depending on who's doing the counting, there's somewhere between 24 and 35 volcanoes in Guatemala, and some of these might be peaks that are real close to one another, and they've erupted before, and they've been given separate names. So I guess you could say there's a lumper and a splitter faction in naming volcanoes. Some people will name as many as they can, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. And other people are more conservative and say, well, these two peaks are so close together, it's really the same volcano. But anyway, there's a lot of volcanoes there. If you travel in Guatemala, you will see them in Antigua. Any place as you go to the coast, you're going to run into the volcanic belt. And they're spectacular, even when they're not erupting. Beautiful things. It's too bad they haven't issued a whole series of stamps honoring all their volcanoes. Here is a postcard, Volcan Catenango, and this is one that's right next to Antigua, next to Agua and Fuego. This is a postcard from about 1902. And here's one of the stamps that was issued. This is Scott 273. This is Lake Atitlan. And the volcano Atitlan is looming over it to the right here. You can see right in the corner. This lake is a caldera of the Atitlan volcano. And it's a lake. It's a huge lake, beautiful lake. And we traveled this lake to go over to this shore and stayed at a coffee plantation in 2006. Had a wonderful time. Um, One of the unusual things about this lake is since it is a caldera, our guide told us that periodically all the water disappears through fissures in the bottom of the caldera floor and the lake totally empties. And then it fills up again with the heavy rains they get, from the rainy season, which is June and November. So it'd be sort of amazing to see something like that. Of course, not when you're on the lake in a boat, but the villages around the shores of this lake, there's hardly any roads. And so most of the transportation from village to village is by boat. Here's one of the issues. This is a famous one. This is Volcan Agua outside of Antigua again. And this issue, of course, is 14B, C14B. This was the upside down printing of the overprint. They reissued this for exterior use. When the stamp was originally issued, I think it's C7, it was just for internal airmail use. Then in 31, they did the overprint so it could be sent overseas, and then some of the stamps were printed, the overprint was printed upside down. It's not real valuable. They made quite a few of them, but it's cool. And I'm sure some of you have this on cover. I haven't seen this error on cover, but I'm sure Dave or other people must have it. Here's Lake Amatitlan, and Amatitlan is a larger lake than Atitlan, and it's formed the same way. It's a caldera. It's very similar. This is probably one of the more common stamps issued in 1902, and it's Scott 118 in that series, and it's very heavily used on postcards of that period of time. So this is from a postcard. In fact, this is from the Otto Zaire postcard that I wrote an article about in the last El Quetzal, because I had this that's the back of the postcard that I pictured, and it's the only one I've ever seen that was used around the time those postcards came out with the 1902 issue on the front of them, and mailed from Guatemala. So it's sort of unusual, but anyway, here's the volcano, here's the lake, and very similar to Atitlan. And here's another view. Another stamp was issued of this one. This, I think it's 243. I forgot. Yeah, here it is. Scott 243. And this one was overprinted later on, actually revalued, as so many Guatemala stamps are. And there's differences in the bar that was used to block out the value and all that. So pretty common. All of them are. Here's another postcard view of a lake and volcano, Amatitlan. And fishing that takes place on these lakes. There are a lot of fish in them. People make their living off the lakes fishing. And very scenic. It's a wonderful country to travel in. It's not that safe, but if you take precautions and have a good guide, there's no problems. It's the roads are not good. It takes forever to travel from one place to another, even if it's not very great distances. And so if you go any great distance in Guatemala, you want to fly. Like if you're going to Tikal or something like that, you want to fly instead of drive. Finally, here's a volcano in El Salvador, Izalco. And this is spectacular. When I first got this postcard, I didn't realize it was a Salvador volcano, because it was mailed from Guatemala. It's got Guatemalan stamps on the back. But just look at that. It's amazing that somebody caught that with such a great photograph in 1901 and captured it. So El Salvador is part of the same volcanic and plate tectonic belt that produces all the Guatemalan volcanoes. So this is really very related to the Guatemalan volcanism. And that's my presentation. It's a short one, but I figured there'd be a lot of questions. So let's go to that.